There's a growing movement to save the Showbox from being demolished and replaced with a high-rise apartment building. But is this downtown music venue a landmark worth saving?
Whether this deal goes forward or not is hard to tell.
It's going to be a same battle of David versus Goliath.
More than 100,000 have signed on to save the Showbox, including some of Seattle's top artists.
You gotta save the Showbox.
And what you're going to have is a pile of bricks with a padlock around it that's designated historic.
Our panel weighs in.
We're just kind of tired of the city getting bulldozed.
Property rights and the cost of cultural preservation. Next on City Inside Out. Welcome to this edition of City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. When news came out this summer that a developer was planning to tear down the Showbox Theater at First and Pike and build a new high-rise, Seattle music fans spoke out, and the City Council has responded by temporarily designating the building as part of the nearby Pike Place Market Historic District. But the property owner has sued, saying the city is killing his plans for development and also acting in direct opposition to Seattle's goals to build more affordable housing. So, the emotions surrounding a decades-old music venue are up against the hard reality of a multi-million-dollar land deal in a court battle between culture and property rights about to hit a high note.
It doesn't look the same.
The Showbox Theater on First and Pike has hosted Rock and Roll Hall of Famers, local legends, and everything in between.
It was just really cool.
For local comedian and musician Jay Middleton, this 79-year-old theater is a lot more than just a place his band played 6 times between 2006 and 2009. It's a venue that helped define Seattle's music scene.
The Showbox is pretty much a phenomenon.
That's why when the news broke this July that a developer was going to tear down the Showbox to build a 44-story high-rise, Jay started a petition to stop that from happening.
And I just wanted to do my part. I just wanted to see what I can do to help and see if we can save this.
The petition has turned into its own phenomenon, as more than 100,000 people as of early October have signed on, including some of Seattle's top artists.
I'm not the one who's going to save the Showbox. It's 107,000 people who signed the petition that are going to.
You gotta save the Showbox.
The Seattle City Council responded to that swell of civic support in August by designating the Showbox as part of the Pike Place Historic District, essentially freezing activity on this property through June of next year. Supporters of the Save the Showbox effort are celebrating a win, but a big court battle is still ahead. Landowner Roger Forbes, who made a deal with the Ani Group to sell the Showbox back in April, filed a lawsuit in September against the city. The suit claims the City Council's move to place the Showbox in the historic district is simply a way to appease its constituents and force a specific property use on a private landowner. Currently, entertainment company AEG Live operates the space and puts on shows here, under a lease that's up in the year 2021. Attorney Brad Keller, representing owner Roger Forbes, tells the Seattle Channel, the city ordinance was an illegal spot zone that singled out this one property and stripped it of its development potential. The ordinance also was enacted without following any of the procedural and substantive safeguards that the Seattle Municipal Code requires before the city takes away the development rights of an individual property. Councilmember Shama Sawant remains confident.
We all stood united.
Yet while Sawant has helped spearhead the Save the Showbox campaign, Councilmember Rob Johnson, who wasn't at the historic district vote in August, has some serious concerns.
If I had been there, I probably would have been on the other side of the issue.
Not only is the owner seeking $40 million in damages from the city, which approved an upzoning of this property last year, but the city would also give up $5 million in affordable housing money if the high-rise plan were killed.
I'm hopeful that we haven't closed the door to the idea that we could have development, housing, and a music venue there, and we'll just have to wait and see.
Attorney Brad Keller tells the Seattle Channel, The city could have, and it should have, engaged in a dialogue with the property's buyer to explore whether a Showbox music venue could be included in the redevelopment. The city refused to have that dialogue before, and it will be too late after the ordinance is stricken. Now is the time for the city to be exploring that alternative.
Because we have such a hot real estate economy, we have to be creative in finding ways to save these venues.
The city is hoping to take the next several months to review the historic significance of the Showbox. But that's complicated by a city landmark review in 2007 that gave this often remodeled building the lowest possible score, and the fact that this structure is on the city's list of unreinforced masonry buildings at high earthquake risk. So what's next? Some on the council believe the answer could come from the Seattle music scene itself.
The music community does have resources, and if this is the top priority to preserve music forever in Seattle at that venue, then we have some time to figure that out.
Attorney Keller says the city and property buyer could figure out a win-win solution to include a music venue. Otherwise, he says, the property owner is going to pursue invalidation of the ordinance and very substantial damages. And if he wins, Seattle taxpayers will, once again, end up paying the bill for the city council's grandstanding. It's a complex, high-dollar battle in Seattle's world-famous music scene that Jay Middleton says is nowhere near over yet.
The owner just wants to get paid. We understand that. But we also understand that we want culture to survive here in Seattle. We're going to have to stand our ground. We're going to have to do the best that we can.
And here to discuss this issue a little further, we have with us Eugenia Wu. She is the Director of Preservation Services for Historic Seattle. Eugenia, good to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
And also we have Roger Valdez. He is Director at Seattle for Growth, an advocacy group that deals with housing and neighborhood growth. Roger, good to see you again, too.
Thank you.
Here we go. Eugenia, I'll start you off here. I want to start by asking about what Historic Seattle is and how specifically you're involved in the Showbox situation right now. Also, more generally, if you could, I want you to let us know why you think this fight to save the Showbox is worth having.
Sure. So Historic Seattle was founded in 1974 as a Preservation and Development Authority, PDA. And we've been saving historic places that matter since then. We're also a 501c3 nonprofit membership organization, so we have a lot of constituents who support us.
Got it.
Some of the properties that folks may be familiar with that we own 8 historic properties, including the Good Shepherd Center in Wallingford, the Cadillac Hotel, which is the unreinforced masonry poster child in Seattle, in Pioneer Square.
Right.
And our most recent completed project is Washington Hall in the central area.
Talk about the Showbox here. Why is it worth saving?
The Showbox is worth saving. This is an interesting one for us. We've been talking about engaging broader audiences and reaching and doing more outreach beyond our usual supporters. And this one really hit a nerve in the city, and we've been able to engage a lot more people who may not consider themselves preservationists, but because they love the city and they love what the Showbox represents. It's not about nostalgia. It's about place and the significance of cultural heritage and cultural spaces. Cultural spaces are going away, particularly more historic ones, and so that's why we put in a lot of effort into trying to save the Showbox.
We'll talk about some of those efforts in a minute, but Roger, I want you to give us some background on your group, Seattle for Growth, and also why generally you have some concerns about this fight to save the Showbox.
Seattle for Growth is a 501c4 nonprofit, and our mission is more housing of all kinds everywhere in all parts of the city for people of all levels of income. And I think that the problem with this is we're not talking about the economics of the site, and I think that, you know, when you look at it, you've got the building, which already has been determined in a previous process to not be significant, and then you've got the use. And those two things are very different, and they're different in the law, and they're different economically. And as you pointed out on this list of thousands of buildings, here is the Showbox on this list of unreinforced masonry buildings. This is a very dangerous building, and the city when it does policy through Bullhorn, is neglecting the fact that every night people are getting together there and seeing shows in a very unsafe place. If they designate it, that's expensive to upgrade that, and the theater can't rationalize that expense of upgrading the seismic in that building. So what's happening is the value of that as housing as opposed to a theater use has increased in the market. So by adding a historic designation, you're going to make that even more difficult, and the rationale for being able to preserve that building is going to get harder. And what you're going to have is a pile of bricks with a padlock around it that's designated historic. So the theater is not going to be able to function because it's unsafe, and no one will be able to make the repairs, and it will close. And that's where we're headed. And unless the city gets smart and stops making political decisions and looks at this as an opportunity, that's where we'll be.
Okay, thank you for that. And we'll pull apart some of those issues too. But Eugenia, I want to talk about specifically Historic Seattle applied to landmark this property with Vanishing Seattle and Historic Belltown. I know the Ani Group, the buyer, had talked about doing that, but you beat them to it. Tell me why that timing of that was important also, and how can you call the Showbox a landmark when this group in 2007 said it really wasn't? Those two issues, please.
Sure. So that'll help address your answer and also what Roger just said. So just to be clear, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation out there about what was determined in 2007. So what this was the downtown survey in 2007. It was a survey conducted by the City of Seattle's Historic Preservation Program of buildings downtown. And this was to look at potential eligible properties for landmark status. And there are 4 categories, categories 1 through 4. And the category 1 buildings, the city proactively retained the services of the consultants to prepare landmark nominations. Some of them got designated, some of them did not. The city doesn't have money to go through all the categories to look at that and nominate everything. The Showbox property has never gone to the Landmarks Preservation Board. That is the body that actually makes the official decision on landmark nomination and designation.
Important to know. All right.
So it's misinformation. People are misinformed, or they're putting it out there saying that the city already said it was not a landmark. That's not entirely true. So we took it upon ourselves to prepare a landmark nomination in record time. We had a fantastic consultant, Northwest Vernacular, do it in basically 10 days. And our reason for doing that was that so we would be the official applicant and have a seat at the table and make our argument for why this property is significant and should be landmarked.
I think the challenge here, and Roger brought this up, you can landmark the property, but you can't necessarily designate the use. And that's a big difference here. And even landmarking, I just want to make sure that we're clear on this too. Even if this building was landmarked, that wouldn't necessarily dictate that there will be a music venue there.
That's correct. And we've been upfront about that the whole time. We deal with this issue in other places around the city, and we let people know that even if a building gets landmarked, it doesn't dictate the use. The Landmarks Board does not have that purview. And so that is an issue. And so what happens when you have legacy businesses or cultural spaces where it's the building and the use that's important, but it's part of that cultural heritage. So the landmarks criteria, there is a criterion that addresses cultural and economic heritage. And but yes, the board does not review use. And so we, like as I said, we've been upfront about that. And so we've always said it's one way to help protect the property, but it's not the only way. And so that's why we need to look at other avenues. And I do want to say one thing about it is an unreinforced masonry building. It is on the city's.
Can we get into that in a little bit? Yeah, we're going to get there, I promise.
Right.
Roger, I just want to make sure that I'm clear with this. I think you recognize that with more than 100,000 people saying, we want to save this theater, there is a cultural significance to it. Do you recognize that and see that?
We can save the use, we can save the building, but we've got to get smart about it. I mean, we have a housing shortage in this city. We also have a chronic shortage of imagination in this building, City Hall. These guys have got to stop politicizing this and look at things like transfer of development rights, where what the city could do is sell, or the buyer could get the money, as the person pointed out. They could get the money from the sale and then transfer those development rights to a receiving site and there could be a big upzone there, and then we could get more housing there and preserve the site. You also have to make sure that you do the upgrades. The city has not substantively addressed the issue of how do these thousands of buildings that are potentially hazardous in an earthquake get fixed so people don't die.
Yeah.
And you know, Historic Seattle, I believe, and For Culture are public development authorities.
Yep.
They have the ability to bond, and if the city backs those bonds, they can get low cost money to borrow.
Okay.
There's also other options to preserve the use within the building. If you can figure out a way to turn that into a condominium. So there's a lot of ways to do this, but it's not just slapping a historic designation again on a pile of bricks, not recognizing the fact that the use is what people really care about.
Let's talk about historic district, and then we'll get to URMs after that if we can. And Eugenia, let's talk about what the city council did. Designated the Showbox as part of the Pike Place Historic District. The landowner says he feels like he was singled out because the council at first was looking at a larger chunk of First Avenue saying this will be included in the district, but then they settled on just the Showbox here. And I'm trying to figure out if that's fair, looking at that, just to have that one building attached to the district there.
I think it probably makes more sense to, if the district were to be expanded, to look at a broader area beyond a single property and create sort of a buffer along First Avenue.
Sure.
As an entrance to the market. And ideally the boundaries would have been larger and not down the middle of First Avenue.
Right, right.
And so that, you know, we're going to end up potentially getting a wall along the east side of First Avenue.
Yeah.
And so we would support studying the feasibility of expanding the district to a larger area potentially, and see what that means, and obviously doing it by communicating with the property owners and being really upfront about it and see what this means. But it's, you know, past land use decisions and zoning decisions brought us here, and so this is what we have. And so important thing is, you know, as advocates, we work with folks to sort of say, you know, pay attention to what's going on. I mean, I know it's basically a full-time job. I know we do it. We because it's part of our jobs to follow what the city does, and it's difficult if you're you know, just trying to live out your life. Where do you put your energy?
There's a lot of time that needs on this.
Come to us earlier rather than later, before the white land use sign shows up. And you know, I think Roger and I do agree that the city does need to get more creative on how to approach some of these issues. And I think there could potentially be some common ground here on having that discussion and not have it so black and white.
It feels like a communication issue a little bit,
Well,
Roger.
I mean, it's absolutely. Historic Seattle is a tremendously important organization, as is For Culture. I mean, art and culture in this community, that use, is highly dependent on real estate. You have to have a place to create your art, show your art, perform, have people see that. So that takes space. Space is real estate. Real estate is money. But this community and this city are dependent on arts and culture to be successful. I mean, why do people come here? They come here not because of Amazon. That's an online function. They come here to work, play, go to the theater, see art and cultural, you know, get value from that. So we need to preserve those uses, and we need to preserve, you know, buildings too. But we have to be economically smart about it. And I think that Historic Seattle at Washington Hall, for example, has shown how you can take an old building that has had a lot of great historic use in it and put those two things together and create a use that's financially sustainable, that will preserve the building and the updates that need to happen. So I think transfer of development rights is probably one of the single most important ideas, which would allow that site to remain the way it is, but financially make the leap so that we get more housing, potentially more affordable housing someplace else.
And I'm going to dive into that affordable housing issue in just a little bit, but I want to make sure we tackle this unreinforced masonry part. Eugenia, I'll start with you. Just a real challenge here. The Showbox is on this list of unreinforced masonry buildings we have here in Seattle, not at all safe in a major earthquake. I know some insiders have said the reason the Showbox Soto opened up because they knew the Showbox at the market would need to come down at some point. Are there any options to save the structure, build on top of it, or where do you go with a building like this?
Yeah, I think not. So I served on the URM policy committee for the city, and our executive director, Kai Kelly, served on the previous technical committee. So we're very well aware of of URM. We, as I mentioned earlier, we own the Cadillac. We saved the Cadillac Hotel after the 2001
Now the Gold Rush
Nisqually
Museum, you bet.
earthquake,
Yeah.
right? And so we found a great tenant, the National Park Service and the museum, and we saved the building when it was going to get torn down. And so most people saw a pile of bricks on the corner of 2nd and Jackson and probably would have said, "Let it go." But we did not, because that building is so important to the neighborhood. And so just because a building is a URM doesn't mean that, oh, it's just better to tear it down and then not to even try to fix it. So the thing was with the Showbox is a lot of the people who were saying, oh, it's dangerous, it should just get torn down, it's not worth saving, or it's going to be too expensive. To my knowledge, they have not actually had an architect or a structural engineer go through the building with the lens of looking at doing a structural assessment, conditions assessment, and what it would take to build it, to reinforce it, and if potentially anything could be built on top. So that's what needs to happen. So rather than just saying X, Y, and Z, let's do some more
study of it,
fact-finding here before you speak.
Okay.
So, and that's what we do. I mean, everything before we take anything on, we do our research, and we do all that before we make these assessments.
It definitely sounds like a high dollar proposition here. And Roger, I don't know
Yeah,
what
the
your thoughts.
economics of this, I think we should continue to talk about that. And I've seen this in small theaters. I mean, when I was, and I've always been an arts advocate. I mean, when I was working as a funder and we were funding small theater venues, we saw it again and again. There was a limit to what the fire department would allow you to put in terms of people in the space.
Sure.
The space was small and it was not seismically fit for habitation. And then there would be a requirement to break open the space to make more money, right? And the only way you could do that was it would trigger the seismic upgrades.
Right.
And you can only charge so much per ticket, right? And at some point, as you point out, the Showbox in Soto is more economically rational than to run a theater in a space where you can't make the upgrades. So the city could do the analysis you're talking about and use public funding to make the retrofits and upgrade the building. The city could buy the building. The city could go TDR. This is 26 pages of buildings that are you know, we have a big problem here.
Yeah, the URM story is one all its own,
right?
for sure.
And I think that this is more a story about the lack of thoughtful approach to the URM issue. And the Showbox is sort of a kind of a symptom or a victim of that URM discussion that hasn't been appropriately resolved.
Okay, a lot going on there with that. Thank you for breaking that down. I want to try to talk about some of the solutions that might go forward. We've talked about a few of them here, but in terms of finding a win-win for the developer and maybe local music too, some council members have said maybe some of our more philanthropic musicians should get a group together and purchase the building. Is that the best path ahead? Is that happening? Eugenia, do you know anything about that?
If that's happening, I would fully support
Give
it.
her a
That'd
call.
be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But yeah, I think it's always easy to sort of say, how about so-and-so? I'm not going to name names,
No,
but how
I got
about
you.
so-and-so?
Right.
They must have a lot of money.
Sure.
And obviously it's not as simple as that, because then we wouldn't even be here discussing this right now if someone wrote a check and said, here, I'm going to buy this property.
Right.
And as part of our multi-pronged strategy, we have said, okay, you know, property owner has every right to sell the building, the property, and so how do we achieve that? Is the economic reality of we're in downtown, the zoning is so high, the expectations, all the values in the land.
Sure,
we know that, and so, but is someone going to pay $40 million to keep it the way it is now?
Right.
You know,
especially when they're getting something that is of questionable value. So
it's not questionable value.
No, it has a certain cultural value.
It has cultural value.
Yeah, but wealthy people didn't get wealthy by being stupid. So they're going to look at this and go, okay, fine. If I write this check, I still am on the hook for the upgrades to the seismic.
Okay.
So I got to lay that cash out.
Yeah.
If they're going to a bank to get financing, the bank's going to say, wait a minute. How do we get our money back from a theater that charges $30, $40, $50 a ticket? We can't.
Right.
So again, the economics of this site dictate it's not going to work out. So we got to start looking for other solutions that are creative. that involve smart financing, potential transfer of the development rights, maybe a public purchase, maybe some kind of a public-private partnership, maybe locating that theater use in the new building. I think that's a possibility. As someone has pointed out, there's a housing crisis, what people call it, so we need the housing too. So all of these things can be resolved, and I think we can do it together as a community, thinking and using a pencil and calculator to figure it out, not shouting and trying to create a political issue out of it.
Thank you very much for that.
So,
we need to start wrapping up here, please.
So there are a lot of different things in which Roger just said.
Okay.
I think it's not so binary. It's not housing or preservation. It's not this or that. And there are other potential sites with the similar zoning that the developer can go to. Maybe there's a building on it. If it's not significant, we're not saying save every old building in Seattle. That we've never ever said that. And so there are other options, other alternatives for development. And again, it shouldn't only come down to economics. And because again, if it did, then
where would we be?
Where would we be? And you're pitting that thing against, well, why? There's a huge land grab going on. It's been going on for several years now, and maybe it's slowing down a little bit. And so that's why this was a line in the sand that was drawn by people who were like, this is enough, and this is it. And we're going to speak out because we're just kind of tired of the city getting bulldozed and not being in control of the narrative and letting others say what they think is important for us and having this crammed down their throats. And as Roger said earlier, people they're moving here for for the arts and culture, for the natural beauty. They're not moving here for a luxury high-rise apartment downtown.
I need to go the 15-second version. What you hope happens next? I know we have a landmark nomination hearing coming up. We've got a trial date next year with this. 15 seconds. Can you tell me what you hope comes out of all this?
That we get the property designated a landmark, that the city wins its lawsuit, or the lawsuit gets dropped, and that we save the Showbox and still have its continued use. And that's what we'd like to see.
Roger, 15 seconds, please.
I think we need a resolution to this URM issue. I think it may come from the state in the next legislative session. That means financial resources. It means relocation assistance. It means looking at ways to leverage the capacity someplace else. And I hope that the city will contact our group and others to put our heads together to solve it so we can save the use and save that use someplace there or someplace else.
Got it. Thank you very much for your input. We will be right back.
I think we need to save the Showbox. We're losing a lot of our culture. A lot of the buildings are going away.
It's got charm, it's got character, it's one of Seattle's landmarks.
Financially, it's a challenge. With the growing city, I don't think it's going to happen.
We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on Facebook and Twitter and give us your feedback. Before we close today, it's time for our weekly CIO poll. Do you support the effort to save the Showbox? Yes, no, or are you undecided? We want to know what you think. Cast your vote and send us your comments at our website, seattlechannel.org/cityinsideout. While you're there, you can watch our programs online anytime. Coming up next week, it's our election preview show. We gather some of the area's best reporters for a journalist roundtable on the most interesting races and initiatives this midterm election. That's next time on City Inside Out. I hope you join us.